A damp breeze stirred the ivy on the wrought iron gates as I approached the old estate. A sense of quiet dread clung to the air, as though the place itself exhaled gloom with every whisper of wind. The estate was immense, boasting a mansion of dark stone and tall windows that reflected no light. Its silhouette absorbed the moon's glow, an endless black monolith. Even more daunting than the mansion, however, was the greenhouse beside it, an enormous structure of curved glass and twisted metal supports that rippled with an eerie luminescence. It looked less like a horticultural haven and more like the ribcage of some gargantuan creature, shimmering from within as if alive. The stories I had heard were little better than myths, rumored curses upon the family that owned this domain, but none of those tales prepared me for the sight of that greenhouse looming in the darkness. Its greenish glow tempted as much as it threatened, beckoning me closer even as my nerves frayed. Word of the estate's peculiar horticulture had reached me through obscure botanical circles. They spoke of a covetous collector named Antonia Blanchard, a reclusive woman said to have scoured the globe for rare, exotic, and dangerous species. She had eventually vanished decades ago, leaving the estate and her fearsome collection in disrepair. My own interest in carnivorous plants initially drew me here, yet as soon as I crossed the gates, it felt as though I had strayed into forbidden territory, where the living and the dead walked side by side among green leaves and serpentine vines. I first stepped into the greenhouse when the moon reached its zenith. Cold dew clung to the metal door handle, which resisted my grip as if the place refused to open for me. A jolt of hesitation trembled through my hand, but I pressed on, turning the handle with force until the door finally gave way. Warm, humid air rushed out, heavy with the scent of rotting vegetation. The corridor beyond was lined with glass panels coated in algian, faintly flickering with the glow of strange luminescent lichen creeping across their surfaces. The light was not pure moonlight, for though there were pockets of silver beams, a sickly green phosphorescence overshadowed all else. The walkway snaked into the distance, branching off into hidden alcoves and side chambers, festooned with plants I had never seen or dreamed of. I walked slowly, leaves brushing against my jacket, thick vines squishing underfoot with a disturbing sponge-like texture. An uncanny silence filled this enclosed world. No chirp of insects, no rustle of small nocturnal creatures. Then, somewhere behind a curtain of black leaves, I heard a soft gurgle. At first, I assumed it was water trickling in a fountain, but as I ventured deeper, stepping over tangled roots and around broad pitcher plants that seemed to lean hungrily in my direction, the sound morphed into something else. A wet, chewing noise. My mind dismissed it as a trick of the echoing environment. Still, I could not shake a growing sense that something large was feasting beyond the green labyrinth. Eventually, I came upon a wide, circular chamber. Translucent panels high above formed a dome, allowing moonlight to mix with the glowing lichen that streaked the walls. This chamber was crowded with plants, each vying for space and resources, their leaves and vines overlapping in a dizzying tangle. Tendrils and stems were abnormally thick, pulsing faintly in the gloom as though pumping blood rather than sap. In the middle of the chamber stood what appeared to be a central trough of loam, at least 6 feet across, ringed by spiked leaves that flared outward like jagged teeth. Scattered about the rim were small, white fragments that glistened in the moist soil. I leaned in closer and realized they were bones, human bones, picked clean and half buried in dark, compact. My stomach lurched. Before I could fully absorb the horror, I felt movement behind me. Spinning around, I strained to see who or what had entered. A slight figure emerged from behind a towering fern with broad black fronds. It was a man, maybe in his 60s, draped in a frayed gardening apron that was stained brown and green with splotches of something darker. His posture was stooped, and he held a small pruning knife in one hand as though perpetually ready to clip a stray vine. Sleet reflected in his eyes with unnatural intensity, but his face was eerily calm. You shouldn't be here. He spoke quietly, voice low and rasping, as though inhaling the thick perfumed air had worn down his throat. These plants, they hunger, and it's best if they remain undisturbed. I backed away from the large trough, heart racing. Who are you? Caretaker, he replied. Have been for many years. Since the mistress left, someone had to feed them. He looked to the carnivorous foliage as though they were children, then back at me with an air of despair. The greenhouse must be satisfied. If it isn't, it spreads. His words made little sense at first. I caught fleeting glimpses of something twitching among curled tendrils. The caretaker's hand jerked slightly. The blade of his pruning knife glinted under the greenish glow. I realized too late that he was barring the exit behind him. Panic drummed in my chest. Yet, when he spoke again, his tone was measured, almost sympathetic. You seem like a reasonable soul, he said softly. Not like the thieves or the wanderers who broke in, hoping to pillage valuables. They call me a murderer, but I have no choice. These plants cannot survive without flesh. He turned, running a gnarled hand along the spiked edges of one monstrous leaf. The plant shuddered in response, as though it recognized its caretaker. Don't you see? If I don't feed them, the greenhouse will starve and break free. It's their nature. They always find a way to feed. I backed away further, stepping on a broad root that nearly tripped me. My eyes flickered to an opening on the far side of the chamber. Perhaps I could dart around him. The caretaker seemed to sense my thoughts. He shook his head gravely. They already knew you were here, he said. You cannot escape. My mind raced. I tried reason. You don't have to do this. You can let these plants die. It's unnatural. What good comes from preserving them? Let them wither. His eyes snapped with sudden fury. Unnatural? They're older than any cultivated rose or pine or orchard tree you see. This greenhouse existed long before the mansion was built around it. The plants are from ancient seeds, from lands where the dead walk. My mistress, Antonia Blanchard, only rediscovered them in her travels. She wanted to harness their power. But in the end, she realized the cost. He gestured toward the trough of soil and bone fragment. This is their domain. To let them perish is to provoke their wrath, death upon death, feeding the cycle. They want to expand, you see, to spread beyond these walls, devouring all in their path. It takes skill to keep them contained. I seized that moment of his distraction, pivoting on my heel and racing deeper into the greenhouse's labyrinth. The caretaker's voice echoed after me. You'd best be quick. They're always hungry. I thought I heard a soft chuckle under his breath, but I did not look back. Vines brushed against my arms as I dashed, my feet tangling in roots that seemed to twist deliberately. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the greenhouse's surus. Leaves parted and closed behind me, tendrils reaching to snag my clothing. The greenhouse wanted me to stay its occupant, its meal. I ducked into a narrow passage. The air there was thick as soup, the humidity oppressive. I nearly slipped on a patch of wet moss, my hand slamming against a glass panel for balance. Cracks spiderwebbed beneath my palms, letting in a sliver of the moonlit outside world. If I could break through the glass, I might escape. But a looming shape to my right made me recoil. A massive pitcher plant, easily taller than a man. Its mouth parted wide, thick nectar oozed around the rim, and a rancid stench rolled out as if from a deep grave. Drawing closer, I saw a tattered scrap of cloth stuck in its sticky fluid, a piece of someone's shirt, maybe. The unstoppable churn of digestive fluid sloshed within, sending me stumbling away in horror. With a clatter behind me, something fell. I turned. The caretaker emerged from behind a large, vibrant bush dotted with pale flowers. He still held the pruning knife, but his posture was more tense now. There's nowhere else to run, he said with a hoarse whisper. In that moment, a strange, flickering sense of pity coursed through me. I could see lines of exhaustion etched into his face, Perhaps he had once been forced into this caretaking role, just as he now forced me. But if he expected to trap me here, he'd have to fight for it. I lunged. The caretaker dodged aside, though I managed to knock him off balance. The greenhouse's uneven ground betrayed him, and he stumbled, dropping his blade. It skidded across the tiles and vanished behind a cluster of small, quivering stalks. For a moment, we both froze, panting in the greenery as a swarm of thick vines began weaving around our ankles. With a burst of adrenaline, I wedged my boot under a twisted root and kicked free, though a vine left a deep scratch on my shin. The caretaker tried to retrieve his knife, but the cluster of quivering stalks hissed like serpents, opening wide lamprey-like mouths. He snatched his hand back before the plus sign of sharp teeth could clamp down. Meanwhile, I used his distraction to slip past him, searching for an exit. "Stop," he growled, but his voice quavered, losing some of its earlier commanding tone. I sprinted through arching corridors of curved glass. My lungs ached from inhaling the stench of rotting vegetation. The greenhouse's labyrinth seemed designed to entrap. Several interactive passages led to dead ends, blocked by thick, barbed creepers. Each time I tried to find a new route, I discovered more horrifying flora. Gargantuan flytraps with spikes, luscious and moist from fresh feeding. Vines that curled like spider legs, branches that snapped hungrily with the faintest brush of air, and the caretaker's footsteps, increasingly frantic, echoed somewhere behind me. At last, I burst into a new space, an antechamber that appeared more ordered, like a gardener's workshop. Rusty tools lay scattered on tables, gardening gloves caked in dark residue, and half-filled vials of potent fertilizers lined a series of shelves. The odor of formaldehyde laced the humid air, reminding me uncomfortably of a mortician's lab. A decaying wooden door stood in one corner, but it was locked tight. I rattled the handle in vain. In the corner, an old furnace glimmered faintly, its door open. Next to it sat a row of dusty glass containers, each labeled with cryptic names such as blackroot extract, ebon dew, and plasmic serum. My gaze darted from the shelves to the caretaker's approach. Then I noticed a heavy axe leaning against the wall. He stepped into the workshop, face drawn, eye sockets tinted green from the glow. We stood tense, separated by tables and potted horrors that quivered at our presence. With seeming reluctance, he bent down, retrieving a rusted trowel from the floor. "I don't want to kill you," he sighed, "but it's the only way. The greenhouse is never satisfied. It rots from within if it doesn't feed, and then it bursts these walls and seeps out into the world." "How do you know that?" I demanded, edging closer to the axe. "Maybe it's just a greenhouse with monstrous plants. Maybe they'll die if you don't feed them. Why do you cling to this place?" He shook his head, despair flooding his features. "My mistress told me in her final moments that the greenhouse itself has consciousness. It's a living organism. The glass, the metal frames, all of it is fused with the plants. An ancient soul slumbers here. The caretaker's duty is to keep it calm with offerings. I tried to spare those who stumbled in, but once they see the secret, there's no turning back." His tone faltered. "I'm truly sorry." I grabbed the axe, gripping the handle with shaking hands. He lunged around a small table, raising the trowel. I swung clumsily, my arms trembling from fear and fatigue. The blade missed him by inches, splintering a wooden shelf in an explosion of dust and old manure. Before I could recover, he was upon me, wrestling for control of the axe. His wiry strength surprised me. The caretaker had endured many nights in this horrific greenhouse. He twisted the axe from my grasp and shoved me backward, sending me sprawling among the pots. The stink of rotting fertilizer filled my nostrils. Immediately, vines as thick as wrists slithered around me, as if rejoicing in the opportunity to snare new prey. Summoning the last of my will, I thrashed and shouted, "Get off!" The vines tightened, constricting my legs and arms, while others slithered around my waist. The caretaker towered above me, brandishing the axe. Grief shimmered in his eyes, reflecting the unnatural light dancing on the glass panel. I felt the vine's pressure deepen, and pain flared along my limbs. The caretaker raised the axe, though, to kill me or to sever the vines. I wasn't sure. In that moment, the greenhouse's hum intensified, as if every leaf and stem vibrated in hungry anticipation. Then the caretaker froze, eyes wide. With a furious hiss, one of the monstrous pitcher plants lunged forward, improbably unrooting itself to extend halfway into the workshop. Its elongated neck of leafy fiber wavered menacingly. Thick sloshing sounds dripped from its enormous open mouth. It must have smelled fresh blood. Without warning, it latched onto the caretaker's arm, swallowing it past the elbow. He shrieked, hacking at the creature's thick exterior with the butt of the axe, trying to pry himself free. Blood smeared the plant's rim, its digestive fluids sizzling where they made contact with his skin. The caretaker's cries were unearthly, blotting out all other sounds. I took advantage of the distraction, wrenching my legs away from the vines in wild desperation. The thrashing caretaker battered at the pitcher plant. It lashed and jerked, further engulfing him, inch by inch. I pulled the vine from my torso. It seemed reluctant to let me go, but the caretaker's predicament drew the greenhouse's attention. Stumbling upright, I grabbed a rusted hacksaw from a nearby table, intending to help or at least to free him so that I might find my own way out. But as I approached, the caretaker locked eyes with me, and I saw his agony and terror. His mouth hung open in a silent scream. Abject resignation washed over his face. "Run!" he whispered, voice ragged with pain. "The greenhouse, these horrors, you must destroy it, burn it all." "Don't become what I've become." The plant gave a final convulsion. The caretaker disappeared into its undulating maw with a sickening slurp. I stumbled back, nauseous. He was gone, devoured, nothing more than a twitching bulge in the plant's main stalk. The pitcher plant retracted into the corridor, satisfied for the moment. My eyes darted to the old furnace in the corner. It was a feeble contraption, probably enough to warm the greenhouse in colder months, but maybe it contained the solution. If I could create a spark, or perhaps feed the old heater enough fuel, it might start a fire that would spread through these withered boards and dry, decaying tools. Even the humidity might not be enough to stop a blaze if it burned hot enough. The greenhouse itself, an organic structure, could be destroyed. I yanked open the furnace door. Cold ash swirled around me. Beneath layers of soot, I found scraps of wood and old coal lumps. I seized bottles from the shelves, uncertain of what each actually contained. One sounded sloshy and labeled highly flammable, though the rest had their own cryptic names. I poured everything flammable onto the wood and rags I could gather. Outside the workshop, the greenhouse softly pulsated, drawing breath. The air smelled rank and alive, its meaty illusions thickening. But I set to work feverishly, scraping flint against a metal rod I found among old supplies. Sparks danced but refused to catch. At any moment I feared the vines would return or another monstrous plant would slither in, lured by my presence. Finally, a single spark caught on a rag drenched in what smelled like kerosene. The rag ignited. My hands trembled as I fed the flame quickly, tossing in more fuel. A small blaze flickered to life inside the old furnace, crackling with relieved vigor. Not caring about the heat's intensity, I shoved the door half shut and hefted the entire furnace using a loose metal handle on one side. It was heavier than I expected. With a grunt, I dragged the furnace forward inch by inch, throwing my body weight behind each heave. The greenhouse groaned, as though sensing my intention. Leaves and vines began to shift in every corridor, coiling with resolute hostility. At the threshold between the workshop and the rest of the greenhouse, I kicked aside a barbed creeper. The furnace's door swung free and a burst of flame gushed from within, igniting the caretaker's desk and a stack of rotted burlap sacks. Smoke immediately curdled in the humid air. I threw one last bottle of the unknown chemical into the blaze. Its contents exploded in a swirl of bright sparks and sizzling arcs of light, scattering embers across the floor. An anguished roar seemed to shake the greenhouse. It wasn't human, nor purely vegetative. The succulent walls trembled. Vines recoiled as though in pain. One of the massive glass panels overhead shimmered ominously. Cracks splintered across its surface. Choking on smoke, I retreated, searching for any door or opening. Fire raged behind me, feeding hungrily on the old wood, dried leaves, and the caretaker's chemical hoard. Flames flicked upward, gnawing at the greenhouse's bizarre living structure. The heat forced me to shield my face. Then I saw it. An iron-reinforced door near the corner of the main corridor. I raced to it, adrenaline fueling my leaps over flaming debris. A huge vine lashed out from my right, but I ducked, feeling the singe of passing flames on my back. The door was surprisingly unbarred. I wrenched it open and stumbled out into the night. Cold air blasted my sweat-drenched skin. Gasping, I turned back to see the greenhouse in a state of frantic animation, writhing under a swirling cloud of smoke, and lashing out as though stung by a million insects. Flames devoured the interior, climbing from one plant to the next. The luminous lichen flared brilliantly in the blaze, shedding ghastly green sparks that drifted into the night sky. As I watched, the central dome's glass shattered in a deafening crash, sending shards raining down upon the burning plants. It was as though a monstrous shriek tore from the greenhouse's very essence, a final cry of rage and agony echoing across the estate. I staggered away, collapsing onto damp ground, the smell of smoke heavy in my nostrils. For a long time I lay there, watching the inferno claw toward the heavens. By the time the first hints of dawn broke the horizon, the greenhouse was gutted. Twisted metal beams jutted like the broken ribs of a fallen creature. The air was thick with ashes. A few stubborn flames danced amid the rubble, subsiding at last to glowing embers. I recalled the caretaker's last command, burn it all. Perhaps if he had been allowed to live another life, free of the greenhouse's curse, he might have done the same. Maybe it took this final sacrifice to free his spirit, and mine, Sempa, from the cool morning. I rose unsteadily, my bones creaking with exhaustion. Burned foliage crackled under my feet. I stared at the blackened remains where once towering carnivorous plants had held dominion. Somewhere in the rubble must lie the caretaker's final tragic remains, fused with the monstrous pitcher plant that consumed him. I felt no triumph, only sorrow, touched with relief. Whatever evil had lived in the greenhouse was, for now, vanquished. Yet a nagging doubt lurked at the edges of my mind. Seeds can survive many a conflagration, dormant embers of malevolence waiting for new soil. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see a stray tendril creeping behind me. Nothing moved. Nevertheless, I turned my gaze forward, forcing my hesitant legs to traverse the estate's grounds and leave the smoldering skeleton of glass and metal behind. As I cleared the twisted iron gates, a faint breeze carried the lingering stench of burnt vegetation, a final grim reminder of the greenhouse's monstrous appetite. I fought against the urge to look back again. The cycle was broken, for now. My hands still trembled from all I'd witnessed. Turning my back on that cursed domain, I departed, hoping that I had severed the greenhouse's malign roots, and dreading the possibility that some fragment of that ancient hunger might endure, hidden beneath the charred soil, waiting patiently for the feast to begin anew.